into the discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I hope the PPT is visible to all of you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so primarily, before we get into the actual course, let me make a few clarifications. Our uh, topic of the workshop is semiotics of cinematic adaptation. So I go with the assumption that most of us are familiar with cinema, and we are all probably movie buffs, and we like to watch different kind of films. There are three important terms in the title. One is semiotic, second is cinema, and third is adaptation. So semiotics is primarily the uh, study of science systems, which we will see in today's class. And cinema is also a field which is widely studied across the world. So second part of today's uh, lecture would be on the semiotics of cinema, how cinema is being studied across the world. And third term that we're using here is adaptation. Adaptation is primarily studied under comparative literature, and our basic concern of this workshop is the issues related with the adaptation. Okay, so I believe most of us are not much familiar with semiotics and the semiotics of cinema. So I today's class I will devote to the introduction to these two concepts. Okay, I've been using a lot of definitions, images, some videos, uh, and all these are used for academic purposes. So let's begin. If you have any doubt, or probably the things that I'm talking about and is not clear, you can just put it down in the chat box. So at the end of the lecture, we can go through all those questions and I can try to respond all of them. Right? So let's begin. Semiotics is directly associated with this idea of making up meaning, especially in Western tradition. Semiotics is considered the science of science, but Eastern tradition, semiotics is associated with the idea of meaning or the processes associated with meaning making. So here we we are all humans, and we as humans do certain processes and activities to make ourselves understood by the others. Okay. The science that tries to understand those processes is known as semiotics. For example, we we talk, we wear certain kind of clothes, we make certain gestures. Okay. So all these are basically the processes, all these are basically the behaviors that allows us to express ourselves and others to understand us. So everything that can communicate a message to other person, okay, is studied under what we call semiotics. Okay. There are two names widely used for this science. One is semiotics and another is semiology. So, semiotics involves a study not only of what we refer to as science in everyday sense. See, we have one idea of sign in our everyday language. Semiotics does talk about that sign, but at the same time, semiotics also refers to sign in a very technical sense. So, there, signs take the form of words because we communicate through words, would take the form of images because we see images and we derive some meaning, sounds, gestures, objects. So everything that can communicate a meaning is a sign in semiotic sense. And under the umbrella of semiotics, we study all those objects or all those, let's say, signs, symbols, words, okay, that can communicate meaning to other person. We study that. Contemporary semioticians study science not in isolation but as part of semiotic science systems. Let's say when we say English language in the language of semiotics, we say that there is a science system of English language. So those who understand that science system can communicate in that particular science system. If I don't know English language, I haven't studied the science system of English language, if you speak English, I will not make sense. Okay. So there are different sciences. So cinema is also one science system. So when we are thinking about adaptation or the theory of cinema, then we need to understand that what are the signs used in the cinematic, what we call text, and how those signs are interrelated. So that's where we think in terms of sign systems. The semioticians study how meanings are made and how reality is represented. And this is something of the most important aspect about semiotics, that by using all these different types of signs, we consciously or unconsciously represent the meaning, represent the reality the way we perceive the reality. Okay. And probably two people's reality may be different, and that's where the representation, the process of representation, and the politics of representation come into action. So when we say cinema, cinema is primarily a visual, or what we call oral visual medium of representation. There are some characters, some sounds, some sequences, okay, some frames that will do representing, and that will help us to see and interpret certain sequences in a particular way. So, as a human, we use following types of signs to express ourselves. For example, language. We all have our own language, our own mother tongue, plus we know one or two other languages. Okay, and by using these languages, we express ourselves. We express what we feel. Okay, we express how we see the world. We express how we analyze various events. So that is possible because there is this sign system of language and we are master of it. And we know that some other people also understand the sign system that we are using. Similarly, various rituals we use in our day to day life. So that is also something comprehensible. For example, we simply use some sort of greeting. Of course, we use greeting through language, but many times we also use greetings without using language. Okay, hand gestures, we shake hands. These are basically ritualistic behaviors, and by doing that, we express ourselves. We want to meet someone, or we are meeting someone for the first time, or we are departing, so we say bye bye. So again, we are using hand gestures. Now, these are all ritualistic events. And again, in religious practices there are rituals, in cultural practices there are rituals. So when we practice a specific ritual, we again assert that we belong to a particular culture or we belong to a particular religion. Similarly, in case of cinema, we also use visuals to express ourselves, because we ultimately see cinema. Okay. And then there are sounds that enhances our experience of the cinema. So many times while watching a film, we understand that there is something sinister happening because of the music. Okay, or we expect something not so normal things happening because that kind of music is being played in the background. Okay, so we are surrounded by signs. We are not very conscious about those signs, but still we are surrounded by signs, and unconsciously we make use of those signs. I'll give you one very simple example here. All of you must have seen this uh, logo and name based uh, of Sony Vaio product. Now, what is so unique about this name is this was the first digital product created by Sony company. So, in this name itself, they have conveyed the message that they have moved from the analog to digital. So, first two letters, that is what we call V and A, that is a symbolic of a wave, okay, which was a symbol of the analog, and the last two letters I and O also represent 1 and 0. So that is the significance of the digital. So in this name itself, they have communicated the message that now we are moving from analog to digital. We are uh, what we call evolving in terms of the technology, because digital technology is considered what we call modern, and more modern than the analog technology. So this is not just a name, but it becomes a symbol. It represents an evolution. Okay, and those who are aware about the computer language, and they know what is analog and what is digital, they can easily identify that this particular name uh, is telling you something more than just name. And that's where we start talking about semiotics. Okay, there's something that we see on a very surface level, very easily comprehensible, like we read VAIO, but at the same time that VAIO also represent uh, the movement, the growth of a company, and that's where the semiotic analysis enters. So, what is semiotics and how it gets its name? So, the two major figures in semiotics. The first one is Ferdinand de Saussure. So, he uses the term semiology. He was French and he was writing in French. So, he has used the term semiology. Uh, this is Ferdinand de Saussure. There is a book posthumously published in the name of Saussure called Course in General Linguistics. It was actually published in French, Course de Linguistique Générale, which was actually a collection and elaboration of his class notes, his lecture notes, and his students' class notes collected by his students. And then it was published under his name, Course de Linguistique Générale, and later on that book got translated in other languages of the world, in English also, that got published, and it was known as Course in General Linguistics, which changed uh, it is not an exaggeration if I say that this particular book changed the path of social sciences and revolutionized the modern social sciences. And in this book, Saussure talked about his concept of sign. But what is important for us to remember here is Saussure basically talked about sign from linguistic perspective. That is, Saussure was just talking about the sign of or sign through language. So he uses this concept of sign, that there is a signifier and signified. That signifier is basically defined as the sound image, or if we include the writing, then what we call the chain of alphabets. So that's a signifier, and it identifies something, or it invokes something in our mind. So that becomes signified, or in simple language, it is called concept. So when you use a Latin word like arbor, okay, that's a signifier which invokes the tree in our mind. For Saussure, both signifier and signified are psychological reality. Okay. Saussure did not connect with the uh, outer world. He is primarily talking about the mind of the users. Okay. Shashur also came up with this idea of lang and parole. So the kind of system we have of the science or of the language is a lang, which includes all the possible words or all the possible rules of the grammar. So that's an abstract system there in our mind. Okay. But even if we are master of that abstract system, we will use that system in a very different way. Okay. And because there are certain limitations in terms of physiological limitations, psychological limitations, physical limitations, the limitations of memory. So because of those reasons, the way we actually use that system is called parole. Okay. So our actual speech, what we speak, is the parole. Saussure said that we will have to understand the lang, that is, we will have to understand the underlying system that enables the user to use the language or to what we call make use of parole. But the parole is the data we have. We will have to study parole to understand the system of lang. Okay. So similar attempts like Saussure uh, were made about the language of cinema as well. They tried to identify the what we call underlying system of cinematic language. We will talk about it later. In this system of signs, the signs are related in two basic ways, vertical as well as horizontal. So horizontal is called syntagmatic relationship. When we say the ridiculous girl fell into the pond, okay, we know that the girl and the word ridiculous, the noun and adjective, are related in some way. And their relationship is called syntagmatic relationship. The moment you change the relationship of these two words and you probably put some other word, okay, then you will also change the meaning. Okay, the meaning of the sentence will also get changed. Okay. So in this case, the syntagmatic relationship is basically a relationship of what we call conjunction. A and B and C and D kind of relationship. So there they are interrelated with each other and together they will communicate the meaning. While paradigmatic relationship or what we call the vertical relationship is the relationship in terms of the choices, that is A or B or C or D. So once you select one, you will have to deselect all the others. Okay. Because one is available in that position, so you cannot use the other one. Like in this case, you are saying the ridiculous girl, you have selected ridiculous, so you cannot select silly or foolish or funny or crazy. They are all these words ridiculous, silly, foolish, funny, crazy. They are all in the paradigmatic relationship. Instead of ridiculous, if you select crazy, you cannot select the ridiculous. So that kind of relationship is in Saussurean terminology known as paradigmatic relationship. So these are the basics of Saussurean semiology. Okay. Similarly, we will also see the basics of the Persian semiotics. Okay. Peirce was American and he has actually used the term semiotics. Saussure was French and he has used the term semiology. They were both working on this idea of sign simultaneously, but there is no historical evidence that they were in contact uh, of each other. Okay. So we assume that both of them were working on the concept of sign independently. Charles Sanders Peirce was a philosopher, logician, and mathematician, and majority of his writings on the concept of sign i- are collected in this book called Peirce on Science. Though Peirce has written extensively, see, you have two extremes. Saussure actually did not write anything on the idea of sign. Okay, whatever available on the idea of sign by Saussure is actually collected and published by his students. Okay, and that is only one book. And in that book also there are certain chapters on the idea of semiology and sign. On the other hand, Peirce has written around 5,000 pages on science and various relationships of science and various types of science. In fact, Peirce has identified approximately 96 types of science. Though in today's semiotics, we primarily talk about three modes of science. That is, um, we will talk about it soon. So Saussure's idea of sign was dichotomic. That is, there were two parts of a sign. Peirce's idea of sign is trichotomic. That is, there are three parts. There is representamen, which is very similar to what Saussure called the signifier. There is interpretant, which is very similar to what Saussure called the signified. But then there is object, which was not available in Saussurean sign. In Peirce's sign, the object refers to the real world uh, existence of that specific sign that we are talking about. They say when we are talking about a word like chair, so when we speak the word chair, that sounds, the combination of those sounds, chair, ear, chair, okay, is a representament. We interpret that particular sound in a particular way, okay, that some specific chair comes to our mind, okay, or we interpret the word chair in a particular way. So that is our interpretant. But we have a kind of idealization of the word chair, okay, some chair that we use very regularly. Okay, so that is the object with which we identify this particular sign. That object may vary for different people. Okay, so real world object uh, may be different for different interpreters. And that's the basic difference between Saussurean and Persian idea of sign. Saussure's idea of sign had a kind of communal existence, that the entire society has, or entire community has, the similar interpretation of the sign, while in case of Peirce, the interpretation of the sign is individualistic. And because of that thing, there is something called semiosis, that is the process of making meaning. Okay. That is, Peirce believed that meaning is not static. In the process of interpretation, we derive the meaning. Okay, so that process is called semiosis, and at times that process goes to the extent that from one meaning you can move to another interpretation, to that interpretation you can move to another interpretation. So that interpretation can go on and on until, as an interpreter, we put a limit to that specific process of interpretation. He talked about three modes of signs. First mode is called iconic sign, which means that the representamen and the interpretant are naturally connected. Okay, for example, you can see here, this is basically all these three are the signs for heart. In first case, we know that this, because we have studied in science, we have studied in biology, that this is the image of a heart. So there is natural representation. By looking at it, we know that yes, it is heart. Okay, or let's say if you see this image, okay, if you have seen uh, Charles Sanders Peirce earlier, so just by looking at that image, you know that, oh, this is the image of Peirce. Okay. So that is a natural connection. Your photograph is naturally mm, connected with you. So your photograph is representamen of you, which is a natural representamen. Okay. Another mode is called indexical mode of interpretation. That is, when you see this image, you know that someone is having a heart attack or someone is having pain in his heart. Okay. So there is indexicality. That's people, when they have pain in their heart, they go through a tough time. Okay. And heart is a very, very important organ in our body. So that means heart attack or pain in heart is a very, very serious problem. So anything that is related with heart, okay, especially in terms of medicines and uh, pain, then there is this indexicality of someone's bad health. Okay. And there is this connection that the representer man is connected with interpretant in terms of cause and effect. Okay, so there is pain in the heart, that is the cause. So effect could be the person requires immediate medical treatment. Okay, fine. So that is the kind of indexical interpretation of the sign heart. Third one, what we see in the middle, all of us would agree with this, that this is a symbol of heart. Okay, we have conventionally accepted this particular shape as a symbol of heart. Okay, so we don't need to learn it. So on Valentine days, we have pink shaded and red colored balloons with this shape. Okay. And that means that when you give that balloon to someone, you are basically saying that you are giving heart to someone. Okay, and this is something conventional we have accepted within a society. We have developed this relationship. Here, the relationship between representative man and interpretant is conventional. We have to learn it in some way or the other. What Saussure calls sign is just restricted to this idea of symbolic, because Saussure is talking about sign from language perspective, and all the words that we are using, they are symbolic in nature. The words have certain meaning because conventionally we have agreed to that meaning. Everybody agrees that yes, this word means this. The entire society is using that word in that sense. So symbolically and conventionally, we have accepted those words. So you talked about two uh, exceptions to the symbolic sign or his concept of sign. One is called onomatopoeia, the words that copy nature, and second interjections, that is when we are in pain or when um, let's say we fall, then we have certain sounds coming out from our mouth, or when we sneeze we have certain sounds coming out from our mouth. So that Saussure called natural. Rest of the signs, according to Saussure, were all symbolic, while uh, Charles Sanders Peirce says that there are three modes of signs depending on the relationship between the representer man and interpretant. Saussure said that the relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary. The relationship is non natural. They are not connected. Okay. So, features of sign, how these two are different. So Saussure's sign, Saussure says that the relationship between the signifier and signified is arbitrary and conventional. That is, that relationship is non-natural. A dog can be identified by any other name. Okay, like what Shakespeare said, a rose, um, even if you call it something else, it will smell as sweet. So that's what Saussure's idea was also, that the names are basically we have accepted, they are arbitrary, they are non-natural. So they can be something else. And that's why we have different languages across the world. If those words were natural, naturally connected with the objects that we are referring to, then probably everybody is talking the same language because nature is same for all of us. We represent or we dissect nature differently, and that's because of the language. We'll come to that later. Saussure primarily talks about the linguistic sign. His what we call domain of sign system is language. So he doesn't want to talk beyond language. And we combine various signs following syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship. The relationship we just talked about, the relationship of conjunction, and the relationship of choices. Okay. So that allows us to create the meaning by combining signs in a particular way. Okay. For example, if you see the background of my slide is white. Okay. I had choice. I could have made it black, I could have made it blue, I could have made it orange, red, whatsoever color I like. Okay. So those choices that I have, those are the paradigmatic choices. But then I have made a choice that my slide will be in white color. So considering that choice, now the other choices that I'm making, that is the color of the fonts that I'm using, black, red, and mostly blue. So you'll find only three colors. I want to keep it minimal. Okay. So now these three colors are the choices because they will look good on white background. If in this white background, if I'm using yellow color fonts, then it will be difficult to read. Okay. So then the second choice that I am making, that is white background, black fonts, red fonts, or blue fonts, that is the syntagmatic order. In Peirce's concept of sign, Peirce basically talks about sign from logical standpoint. He was a logician, so he wanted to talk about science from that logical perspective. He referred to language quite often, but his idea of science was more connected with the idea of logic and mathematics. Peirce differentiates three basic modes of science depending on the relationship between the interpretant and representative, how they are connected. If the connection between the interpretant and representative is natural, then it is iconic mode. If the relationship between the interpretant and representative is dependent on cause and effect, then it is indexical mode. If the represent in the relationship between interpretant and representative is arbitrary, then it is symbolic mode. Remember, it is a mode, it is not type. That is, same sign can be interpreted using any of this mode, and you will get different interpretation. Saussure's idea of sign is equal to just symbolic mode in Persian formula. So, the signifying order is the means by which a society or a culture codifies meaning. That is how we create meaning, how we put signs together, and that becomes a meaningful message. So, that is something that has to be something socially and culturally acceptable. It consists of semiosis, that is the capacity to comprehend and create signs. We can understand those signs, we can use those signs, we can put those signs together so that there will be meaning creation. Representation, that is the process of using signs to refer to objects and concepts. I want to talk about, let's say, my mobile phone. So I will have to use the name for it. Let's say I have Samsung mobile phone. It is Android. So I'm using two names which are representations. Okay. Samsung is one type of so many different types of mobile phones. Android is one operating system of so many different types of operating systems. So I'm talking about it. I have words for it. And the third one is the signifying order. That is, what is the order in which things are presented? Cultural complex employed by a given culture to impose representation and order in that society. For example, the narrative sequences in our languages, in our literature, they are also culturally defined. Okay. And if we are creating a text in culturally acceptable manner, our text will be easily understood. If I say John loves Mary, okay, nobody will have a problem understanding it because we know the order. We know John refers to an individual, Mary refers to an individual, loves refers to a particular process or an activity. We all understand it. But if I change this order, John, Mary, loves, let's say, mm, we may not understand what I'm trying to say. Okay. So these are the requirements to have the effective semiotic systems. And there is one more aspect in semiotic system. We when we talk about Saussure, when we talk about Peirce, we are simply talking about the science system which is devoid of any ideology. But Roland Barthes, I hope you know him, one of my favorite thinkers. Roland Barthes introduced the idea of ideology in the system of science. Okay. And he develops a model of myth. He wrote an interesting book in early 60s called Mythologies, which was basically collection of his short articles. And the last article was uh, the theoretical article. He presented his theory in that article called Myth Today. And he was probably the first one to talk about the everyday things. He analyzed the things that we are using in our day to day life from cultural and ideological perspective. He talked about, let's say, detergent powder. He talks about films. He talks about wrestling mania. He talks about Eiffel Tower. Okay. He talks about the very process of criticism. Okay. And he does that using the model of Saussure, but he makes the distinction at the level of meaning. He said that there are two levels of meaning. First level is called denotative meaning, or what we call the dictionary meaning. They say when you see a rose, okay, dictionary meaning is that it's a smelly flower. Okay, so it's a type of flower, nothing beyond that. Okay, so that is the basic meaning, the first level of meaning. But then Barth takes us into the second level of meaning, what he calls connotative meaning or connotation. The rose is not just rose, because when we use or when we start using rose, rose becomes a cultural symbol. Like when we give rose to some opposite gender, okay, we basically mean that we love that person. So at that time, rose is not just a flower. Okay, it is. It symbolizes love. It symbolizes passion, romance. Okay, okay. In certain cultures, roses are offered to the dead bodies on the funerals. So it may also mean death. So that deeper meaning, okay, which is culturally associated. Okay, Roland Barthes in his model of sign takes us into that deeper meaning. That everything has at least two levels of meaning. One is basic denotative dictionary meaning. Another is the deeper meaning, which is ideological, which is cultural. So, what he does, he uses the model of sign by Ferdinand de Saussure, like you have signifier and signified. So, you have form and you have concept. When you combine the signifier and signified, you get a sign. So, that is the first level of meaning, which is denotative meaning or the meaning at the level of language. But what we call sign in the level of language, bars calls is signifier at second level, and there is a signified associated with it. So for example, rose is a signifier that signifies love or passion. So when we combine these two, rose and the love or passion, it gives a kind of culturally significant uh, understanding of the flower rose. So this second level, which is in purple color, is the level of myth, or what Rolabad calls connotative meaning. Okay. And he discusses very important example. We can see here. See, at the surface level, we can simply say that uh, a colored young boy is saluting the French flag. We can't see the French flag here, but that was the context. Okay. And that is denotative meaning. This is something we can see obviously. Okay. And that you can see that that boy is proud. Okay. But Rulabar says that this is not so simple. Actually, this image is uh, the representation at the level of ideology, that is a representation of French colonialism, the condition of the minorities and the colored people in that French colony. Because this boy that we see here, okay, if he is giving this salute out of his own will instead of fear, then this will not be a message. This image comes on a matchbox or on a what we call pamphlet, because the French authorities at that time wanted to communicate the mythic message that all the French people serve the French flag equally. Okay. And that's what Roulabat calls the myth, that they are not equal, they are not serving it equally. In fact, some of them are not even considered uh, the citizens of the French flag. And that's where we talk about the idea of myth or ideology in semiotic analysis. Okay, so considering this, now we move to the idea of semiotics and cinema. This is again my primary concern, is to give brief introduction to cinematic analysis through semiotics, because our major concern will be adaptation theory. So probably we will talk about uh, the semiotics of cinema in some other workshop in more detail. Okay. So this is the first and most important name. It's called Christian Medge. He was the one who used the Saussure's model of sign, and he also tried to develop a kind of langue of cinema. The modern film theory begins with Christian Metz. He tries to develop filmolinguistics following Saussure's ideas of semiology. Okay. The way Saussure created the langue or sign system for language, okay, Christian Metz also tried to create the what we call language of cinema. He attempts to identify the minimal meaningful unit that would enable us to read and interpret cinema like other art forms. Say, for example, in language, the minimal meaningful unit is a word or a morpheme or an affix, to put it in a simple language. Okay. So it has a meaning, and we go by that basic meaning when we are basically interpreting larger chunk. So that basic or minimal meaningful unit is identified in language, and that enables us to understand the language as a system. But in cinema, identifying minimal meaningful unit is very difficult, because in cinema you have multiple layers of interpretation. We will come to that. Another important name, Andrew Saris. Andrew Saris is credited with popularizing auteur theory and making film analysis a serious academic work. Before the advent of auteur theory, cinema was not really studied under the academic banners. And Rusari's contribution is he said that the way you have a writer for a text, for example, for a novel, there is a novelist. For every instance of cinema, there is a director who is the author of that film. Okay. So everything available in that film, every frame, every music, or every beat of music, okay, is because the director wanted it to be there. Auteur theory is theory of filmmaking and analysis in which the director is viewed as the major creative force in motion picture. That is, director is someone who decides how the ultimate outcome of the film should be visible to the audience. Okay. And he actually wrote a series of articles uh, saying that how auteur theory is important. But then at times we found that auteur theory is not uh, powerful enough that it can uh, help us interpret all types of movies. Especially, there are some directors who are making very, very diverse kind of films. So you cannot have a kind of aura or a kind of signature of the director that identifies or gives an identity to the director, that by watching it you'll, like, if you watch movies of Wes Anderson, you will know that yes, this is a movie of Wes Anderson because of the framing and the color that Wes Anderson uses. But every director is not conscious about it, so they found that auteur theory is not enough. And that's where we started talking about another theory called genre theory, which involves classifying a film into a category that contains other films that have similar aspects. Let's say you talk about comedy as a genre. So you take up the similar films, the films that fall into the same genre, and you identify the similarities in terms of narratives, in terms of characters, in terms of filming technique, in terms of various formal and technical features of the film. Okay, because they will be similar. Okay, because the film is made into a specific genre, and the similarities of those films will basically help us identifying genre. The word genre comes from the French and originally Latin word for kind or class. So basically we are categorizing films in different classes. Okay, we all know, and in fact, we normally decide to watch a film based on genre. If I ask you what kind of films you like, you will say, I like romantic comedies, I like science fiction, I like psychological thrillers, I like horror, I like slasher. So these are all genres. Okay, so basically, we as an audience, we can also easily identify the genres. Okay, and that is the second theory that developed in terms of uh, interpreting cinema. One very important approach to the cinema is psychoanalysis, and there we basically talk about cinematic spectatorship. So Christian Medge, we talked about in the previous slide, argues that the signs of cinema have imaginary signifiers. They don't really exist in the real world. Let's say you go and watch the movie like Batman. Okay, so you can see the image of Batman, a character is playing Batman. Okay, and you enjoy the movie, but that Batman that we see is a signifier. Sorry, that is a signified, because we are interpreting it, but it does not have its real, what we call signified, or sorry, signifier in the real world. Okay, it is imaginary. We imagine about Batman. The Batman really does not exist in real world. Okay, fine. So, but the problem is, and it's a problem, not the what we call power of cinema. Mm. It's a problem for the spectators that we start believing things that we see on screen. Okay, considering that we are seeing the imaginary things. How that happens, how that spectatorship, and how we get involved into the cinematic text, that is where we need to understand the psychoanalysis. So, Mez talks about uh, three important processes there. He says he assumes that the spectator is masculine. There's a male spectator, so masculine spectatorial position. Mez identifies three processes of spectatorship. First one is called identification. That is, spectator identifies with represented character. More importantly, spectator identifies with the perception itself. That is, you know that there is an image and I'm part of that image. I'm part of that narrative going on. Identifying self as perceiver, spectator becomes active, producing relationship with the perception, thinking of being a producer. When you perceive, at the same time, you start interpreting that perception. So you start creating the meaning, producing the meaning for the cinematic text that you are experiencing. See, there are two types of identification here. One, you identify with the character in the cinema. In majority of the cases, we identify with the protagonist of the cinema. Okay, fine. So we also think that I'm the same hero that we see on screen. That is one level of what we call identification, and it is not very problematic. The more problematic issue is the second level of identification. That is, we are empowered to think that we are producing the meaning of this work of art. Okay. That is, the interpretant believes that the interpretation that he or she is making is the only correct interpretation. Okay. And thinks that this is the interpretation that everyone else should also make. Okay. So the very idea of polyphony is discarded. Okay. But both these processes of identification are happening internally, are happening in your mind. The moment the movie gets over, you'll come to your real senses, okay, and you come to the real world from the cinematic world. Second process that Medj identified is called voyeurism, that is looking at something that cannot look back at us. Spectators does not feel threatened. Here the spectator is hypothesized as he. Okay. And that's why we always talk about masculine gaze. See, when you are looking at the hero or heroine on screen, we see that, let's say, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie is romancing on screen, and we are from our seat watching them. We know that they cannot see us. So that empowered position, that position that we don't have to worry about being seen, seeing them. We like voyeurism, that is one part, but here the more important part is that we are not threatened. We are not threatened of being caught. Okay. And that enables us to enjoy that voyeurism, that process of voyeurism more so. Okay. And third is fetishism, the erotic contemplation of an object or person. Interestingly, the object of desire is absent, and spectator desires her or his image. Basically, when Match was talking about, he was talking about masculine perspective. So he used the term her image because for the masculine audience, the object of desire was the heroine. The spectators are led to believe that what they see is real. See, when we are watching a film, we see that the characters there are moving and they are lifelike and we desire them. Okay. But they are not the real people. The real people are completely absent. We can still watch Sophia Loren or Monroe, okay, and we can still desire them, though we know that they are no more. Okay. So that's where the object of our desire, that is the heroine, is absent in the real sense that we are only seeing their image and we are desiring after their image. And one more important aspect, that the very idea of image is also something that comes with the idea of completeness, or something, uh, what we call utility, utopian, that is best kind of representation of that particular character. In real life they may not be that beautiful, okay, but because they are presented in a particular way, so we find them very beautiful, very desirable. Okay, so we are desiring after something that is uh, that does not exist, and that is what we call fetishism. Okay, erotic contemplation of object that does not exist, of person that does not exist. Okay, for example, this is a frame from the movie American Beauty by Sam Mendes, which was released in 1999, and uh, the film talks about a father's desire for her daughter's friend, and she's here in the frame, and she's surrounded by rose petals. Okay, now when we are watching this film, we when we are seeing this specific frame, we put ourselves in the position of that character, okay, who is dreaming about this girl. Okay, this is voyeurism, because we know we can see her, but we are not afraid that she will see us back and she'll complain, or she'll probably um, make a police complaint against us, because we are trying to enter in her private life, but in terms of imagination. And in terms of fetish, we can see this character in the film. She's a character. The real, uh, what we call actor who played that character is missing. Okay, is not there on screen, but we still desire after her. Okay, so all these processes are very much active when we are watching any of the, what we call, feature films. Okay, we will some this particular film was also adapted, most probably. Okay, and it had a very interesting philosophical connotations when we watch this film. So how are we going to see the cinema in terms of semiotics, and what are the issues that we will be facing? Okay, so normally we talk about one science system, especially in terms of language. We know that linguistic system is one system. Now in case of cinema, there are multiple systems existing side by side. We don't just talk about language, there are dialogues. We don't just talk about color, because colors are used in the cinema. We don't just talk about shape. All these science systems are simultaneously working in order to create one text of cinema. Cinema is composed of multiple types of science. We need to consider dialogues, that is linguistic system. We need to consider characters, which is primarily cultural system. We need to understand framing, which is basically taken from painting and photography, how a particular frame is created in cinema. We also need to think about camera angle. Different camera angles will allow us to interpret the same sequence differently. Okay, we also need to understand the music. Many times music gives us the clue how to interpret the particular sequence. And if we look at Alfred Hitchcock, his entire what we call creation of horror is through the music and editing. Editing is yet another system of cinema, how you compose different things, put them together, and create meaning. And choreography, how things are uh, put in front of us. Is choreography not just in sense of dancing, but also in the sense that how a particular frame is choreographed, from where the character is entering, from which side the character is going, okay, top, bottom, left, right. All these are basically important aspects to understand. So all these aspects will contribute to the understanding of the given sequence. Okay, so we can't just depend on one aspect and interpret the cinematic text. We need to look at least these seven aspects. They will help us to understand. For example, these are all different camera angles. See, the first one is low camera angle. So when there is low camera angle, it is interpreted as if the people we are seeing are powerful. Okay, so we can see this is a sequence from Pulp Fiction. Okay, so these two characters are projected as powerful, more powerful than the character who is below them, and they are also more powerful than the audience, because for audience also you have to look up to them, so they are more powerful. Okay, so in most of the films when they show some kings or gods, they will be shown from lower angle camera, so that we know that they are in a power position. On the other hand, there is high angle camera. So there, the people we see through that camera on screen will be considered powerless, because someone is watching them from above, from more powerful position. Okay, so this is probably from the Avengers. Third one is called Dutch angle, that is slightly tilted camera angle, which is mostly used in what we call modern postmodern narratives. Okay, then you have overhead shot. This is from the Masters by Paul Thomas Anderson. So you, by using this particular angle, you simultaneously show a very big landscape, okay, where you know what is happening there. And then next sequence would be in one specific aspect of what you have seen in this overhead. And this one is called eye level. That is, the character is face to face to the audience, okay, as if the character is talking to us. And the last one is called the shoulder level. Okay, that is, character is there in front of us, but it is slightly distance, so we can observe them. These are some of the basic camera angles. Okay, they are not by any means all the camera angles. Okay, there are what we call zoom in, lot of trolley shots, dolly shots, and all those things. Okay, so but all of them are used for different purposes to create different meanings. So all of them are significant in different ways. Here we are looking at the idea of frame and use of color. Okay, so this is first one is from Joker. So the character of Joker is visible but in dark, and you can observe the colors used in the background. The second one is from Matrix. So you are in a kind of hypothetical imaginary world where there is no background, and then there are these characters talking. Third one, we will talk about this in the discussion. This is from The Shining, where the character is directly looking into the eyes of the audience and making fun of the audience. This one again from Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood. Okay, so the character in the center is the most important character, but then he's shown subdued, and the other character is doing certain type of ritual on him. But the centrality of the main character shows his importance. This one again is from Shining. You can see the centralization of the character, and Stanley Kubrick, the director of Shining, was popular for one perspective shot. So there will be static camera angle and the camera will move straight. Okay, and you will be observing as if you are also one of the characters in the sequence. While this one is from Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel, where the camera angle is high. So, and you can see the colors. Wes Anderson deliberately uses very, very bright colors to create fantasy out of reality. He's presenting middle class American life as a fantasy in almost all his films. And he creates that fantasy by using framing and colors. I'm not very sure about this particular one, but here what we are shown, this is called um Hitchcockian frame, where the most important part of the sequence is given maximum position or maximum space in the frame. And this is from Jurassic Park. Okay, so again, this is a lower angle shot where this character is shown a very powerful character. And the last one, if I'm not wrong, is from uh, again there will be blurred, which is a kind of long shot where you can see the character and his surrounding. Next sequence would be the zoom in where this character is talking to some other character, but from this shot we know in which background they are talking. Okay. So now when you are interpreting cinema, there are so many things happening. Okay. It is a challenge for us, the interpreters. But if you think like a director, especially when you are adapting a book into a film, you have so many ways of communicating the same message, so many possibilities you have as a director to communicate. That, let's say, a novel is being adapted into a film, the novelist had only one choice. That is, novelist can use the language. Okay, so novelist had linguistic system at his or her disposal that he or she has to use to communicate his or her message. But when the filmmaker is making a film from that novel, the filmmaker has all the seven different possibilities, and filmmaker will have to decide whether he would use one sign system or the other, or simultaneously multiple sign systems to communicate the same message. Okay, so that's where uh, the filmmaker, especially when the filmmaker is adapting a film from some text, has a lot of flexibility. And that's where our question comes, that one of the biggest issues in adaptation is conveying the meaning expressed in the source text. That is, the novel, the poem, the drama is the source text from which the movie is made. So, whatever meaning is there, can we communicate the same meaning in the target text that is in the film? Okay. And is it possible to maintain the same meaning in the target text? So that is the question we will end our today's session. If you have any doubts, any